I swelled with pride the day my son became a police officer, swearing an oath to justice. I never imagined that oath would force him to arrest his own wife in my living room. There's a certain kind of pride a mother feels when her son puts on a uniform. For my Leo, it was the deep blue of a police officer. He stood so tall, so confident the day he graduated from the academy. He swore an oath to protect and serve, and my heart swelled until I thought it might burst. He was a good boy, my Leo. He had a strong moral compass, a sense of justice I'd tried to instill in him since he was a kid. He was the kind of man my late husband, his father, would have been incredibly proud of. I never thought that oath he took would be tested in my own living room, and I certainly never thought the person he'd have to serve justice to would be his own wife. It all started with Brittany. Leo met her about 2 years ago, a whirlwind romance that ended at the altar 6 months later. I tried to like her. I truly did. For Leo's sake, I plastered on a smile and welcomed her into the family. But Brittany was polished. She was all sharp angles, designer labels, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She looked at my cozy, lived-in home, the one I'd shared with her father-in-law for 30 years, like it was a quaint but slightly dusty museum she was being forced to tour. She'd run a manicured finger over the oak mantelpiece, a gift from my husband, and say things like, "Oh, this is charming, very rustic." I knew it was her way of calling it old and worthless. The real trouble began over the locket. It wasn't some priceless diamond. It was a simple, heart-shaped gold locket my husband gave me on our first anniversary. Inside there's a tiny, faded picture of us as newlyweds, young and full of foolish dreams. It was my most treasured possession. For generations, the women in my husband's family passed down a piece of their wedding jewelry to their son's wife, but not on her wedding day. The tradition was to give it to her upon the birth of their first child, as a symbol of the family line continuing. It was a beautiful tradition, one I was excited to carry on. I'd told Leo about it years ago, and he thought it was wonderful. Brittany, however, did not. She'd heard about the locket from Leo and had been dropping hints for months. Not so subtle hints. "You know," she said one Sunday dinner, "my friend Tiffany's mother-in-law gave her the most stunning sapphire ring. Just gave it to her. So generous." I just smiled and changed the subject. But her persistence grew, becoming more like a demand. Last Tuesday she showed up at my house unannounced. Leo was on a double shift, so I was alone, peacefully tending to my garden. She breezed in, not even waiting for me to take off my muddy gloves, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. "Hi, Carol," she said, her tone clipped. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd pop by. We need to talk about the locket." I sighed, wiping my hands on my apron. "Brittany, we've discussed this. It's for you when you and Leo have a baby. It's a family tradition." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. "A tradition? That's a cute word for you controlling things. It's supposed to be mine. Leo's wife. I am his wife, aren't I?" "Of course you are, dear," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "And it will be yours. The tradition is about welcoming a new generation. It's symbolic." "I don't care about symbols, Carol. I care about what's mine by right," she snapped, her voice losing its sugary coating. "It's a vintage piece. It's valuable. Are you worried I'm going to sell it or something? Is that it? You don't trust me." I was stunned by her audacity. "It's not about its monetary value. It's about its sentimental value. It was a gift from Leo's father." "A man I never even met," she scoffed. "Look, I don't have time for your little games. I want it. Leo wants me to have it. That's what really got me. Lying." "Leo understands the tradition perfectly," I stated, my own voice growing firm. "And the locket is staying right here, in this house, until the time is right. The discussion is over." I turned to walk toward the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly. Her next words stopped me cold. "You'll regret this, you old bat." I spun around. "What did you just call me?" Her face was a mask of fury. "You heard me. You live in this dusty old museum, hoarding things, trying to hold on to a past that's dead and gone. That locket belongs to me, and you are illegally keeping it from me. It's theft, you know." My jaw dropped. "Theft? It was a gift to me from my husband. It is my property." "Not anymore. It's a family heirloom, and I am now the family," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the quiet house. She pulled out her phone, her thumb moving furiously across the screen. "You want to play it this way? Fine. We'll see who's right when the police get here." My blood ran cold. "You wouldn't?" "Oh, I would," she said, a malicious grin spreading across her face as she lifted the phone to her ear. "Yes, I'd like to report a domestic dispute and a theft. My mother-in-law, Carol, she's being very aggressive. She's unstable. She's stolen a valuable piece of jewelry from me, and she's refusing to give it back. I'm at her house now. Yes, I'm afraid she might get violent." I stood there, paralyzed, listening to her spin a web of poison and lies to the 911 dispatcher. She made me sound like a deranged old woman, a common thief. My heart hammered against my ribs. This couldn't be happening. The dispatcher's tinny voice was audible from her phone, confirming that a unit was being dispatched to my address. Brittany hung up, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Now, we wait," she said, crossing her arms smugly. Minutes stretched into an eternity. All I could hear was the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, and the pounding of my own pulse in my ears. Then I heard it, a distant siren, growing closer, closer, until it was wailing right outside my quiet suburban street. Red and blue lights flashed through my living room windows, painting the walls in strokes of panic and dread. I saw a police cruiser pull up to my curb. My legs felt weak. Brittany's smile was predatory. A car door slammed shut, followed by heavy, authoritative footsteps coming up my walkway. My whole life I'd respected the police, taught my son to be one of them. Now they were coming to my home to arrest me, based on the venomous lies of this woman. The footsteps stopped on my porch. A large shadow fell across the doorway. The silhouette of a police officer filled the frame, his broad shoulders and steady stance achingly familiar. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. It just couldn't be. The officer standing on my porch, his silhouette blocking out the calm afternoon light, was my son, my Leo. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He took a step inside, and his partner, a man I didn't recognize, followed him in. Leo's eyes, the same warm brown eyes I'd looked into for 32 years, swept over the scene. They took in Brittany, standing there with her arms crossed and a smirk playing on her lips. And then they landed on me, standing by the fireplace pale and trembling. For a fraction of a second, the professional mask slipped. I saw my son, not Officer Davies. I saw the shock, the confusion, and a flash of deep, gut-wrenching pain. Brittany, seeing her husband, seized what she thought was her advantage. She let out a little sob, a pathetic, theatrical sound. "Leo! Oh, thank God you're here!" She rushed towards him, her hands outstretched as if she were running to her savior. "Your mother! She's completely lost it. She attacked me. All I did was ask about the locket, the one you said should be mine, and she just snapped. She threatened me, darling. I was so scared." Leo held up a hand, stopping her mid-stride. His arm was rigid, a barrier between them. "Stay where you are, Brittany," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. It was the voice he used on the job. It was the voice of a stranger. "Both of you, please don't move." The shift in his tone seemed to finally register with Brittany. Her victim act faltered, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. His partner, whose name tag read Miller, looked back and forth between us, his expression carefully neutral, but I could see the cogs turning. He knew this was no ordinary domestic call. Leo turned to me. "Mom," he began, the single word catching in his throat before his professional training took over again. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" I found my voice, though it was thin and shaky. "Leo, she just showed up. She demanded I give her the locket, your father's locket. I told her again about the tradition, that it would be hers when you have a child. She got angry. She called me horrible names, and then she said she was calling the police. She told them I stole it from her. She told them I was violent." Each word was a struggle, my throat tight with unshed tears of disbelief. Brittany scoffed loudly. "She's lying to protect herself. Can't you see how she is?" She lunged at me, screaming like a crazy person. "She's got my locket hidden away somewhere, probably talking to it like she talks to that old picture of your dad. She's jealous of me, Leo. She can't stand that you have a wife now." A muscle in Leo's jaw twitched. That was a low blow, even for her. He ignored her outburst and kept his eyes fixed on me for a moment, then turned his full attention to his wife. His gaze was so cold it could have frozen fire. "Brittany, you reported a violent assault and a theft," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Officer Miller, would you mind examining my wife for any signs of injury consistent with an assault?" Officer Miller gave a slight nod, approaching Brittany with a professional awkwardness. "Ma'am, could I see your arms?" Brittany was completely thrown. "What? Well, she didn't actually land a punch. I told you, she lunged at me. I was forced to defend myself. I feared for my safety." Her story was already crumbling, the lies becoming more desperate and elaborate. Leo didn't even blink. "You also stated on the call that she is unstable. Can you elaborate on that?" "She is. She's utterly obsessed with the past." Brittany spat, gesturing wildly around my living room. "With this old house, with your dead father, with that stupid locket. It's not healthy. It's mine by right, and her refusal to give it to me is proof that she's mentally unstable." The room fell silent. Saying that in front of him was her biggest mistake. Leo's face, which had been a mask of professional detachment, hardened into granite. "The locket my father gave my mother on their first anniversary," Leo stated, each word a carefully placed stone. "The locket whose tradition I explained to you myself. The one I told you would be yours one day. That locket." "But you said I should have it," she insisted, her voice rising to a shrill whine. "No," Leo said firmly. "I said you would have it when you became a mother. I told you what it symbolized." He took a slow, deliberate step towards her. "The 911 dispatcher logged your call. They also logged that you called from your cell phone. I'll need to see that phone, Brittany. It's evidence." A flash of pure panic crossed her face. "My phone? Why? I'm the victim." "Standard procedure," Leo said, his voice leaving absolutely no room for argument. "We have to verify the call came from your device and log it as part of the report. Now." With a trembling hand, she pulled the sleek pink phone from her handbag and handed it over. Leo took it without a word, his thumb expertly navigating the screen. I held my breath, watching his face. Officer Miller stood by the door, a silent, imposing witness to the complete implosion of my son's marriage. For a long minute, the only sound was the crackle of the police radio and Brittany's shallow, anxious breathing. Leo's expression was unreadable as he scrolled. Then he stopped. His eyebrows shot up, and his jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack. A look of such cold, profound fury settled deep in his eyes that it made me shiver. He didn't look at Brittany. He looked straight at me, and in his gaze I saw 1,000 silent apologies. He slowly lifted his head and turned to his partner. "Miller," Leo said, his voice a low, controlled growl that was far more terrifying than any shout. "This is no longer a domestic dispute. This is a criminal investigation." He held up Brittany's phone for his partner to see. Open on the screen was her audio recording app. There was only one recently saved file. The title of the recording, made just minutes before she called 911, was two simple, venomous words. "Old Bat." The air in the living room turned frigid. Those two words, "Old Bat," hung in the air, more damning than a signed confession. Brittany stared at the phone in Leo's hand, as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. The color drained from her face, leaving her perfectly applied makeup looking like a grotesque mask. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The smug confidence she'd worn like a designer suit had been ripped away, leaving her exposed and pathetic. Officer Miller stepped forward and glanced at the phone screen. He looked from the phone to Brittany, then back to Leo, a silent understanding passing between the two officers. He didn't need to ask for an explanation. The malice was self-evident. She hadn't been recording out of fear. She had been recording with intent, trying to bait me, trying to build a case out of lies. "Brittany," Leo said, his voice a low rumble of contained rage. He finally looked at her, and the contempt in his eyes was absolute. "You titled this recording Old Bat. It was created 3 minutes before you placed a call to 911. Would you care to explain why you were recording your aggressor before any alleged assault took place?" I thought she might say something," Brittany stammered, her mind scrambling for an excuse. I was scared. I wanted proof of her instability. You wanted to provoke my mother, Leo corrected her, his voice slicing through her pathetic attempts to lie. You came here with the intention of starting a fight, recording it, and then using that to manipulate me into forcing her to give you the locket. When that didn't work, you decided to escalate. You called 911. You knowingly filed a false report. He took a step closer, and for the first time Brittany flinched away from him. You accused her of theft. You accused her of assault. You described her as violent and unstable. Every one of those is a lie. Do you have any idea what you've done? Tears, real ones this time, welled up in her eyes. Not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity. Leo, baby, please, she whimpered, her voice cracking. I was upset. She drives me crazy with all her traditions and her stories about your father. I just wanted something that was mine, something to make me feel like part of this family. Part of this family? I heard myself say, my voice trembling with a righteous anger I didn't know I possessed. You tried to have me arrested in my own home. You called me a crazy old woman to my own son. You were going to let these men, his colleagues, put me in the back of a police car over a piece of jewelry. That's how you tried to become part of a family? Leo held up a hand, silencing me, though his eyes never left his wife's crumbling facade. Filing a false police report is a crime, Brittany, he said, the words clinical and cold. Wasting police resources is a crime. Slander is a crime. You didn't just have a little tantrum. You weaponized the emergency services. You weaponized my job. You tried to use my uniform against my own mother. He turned to his partner. Miller, did you get all that? Officer Miller, who had been quietly taking notes, gave a curt nod. Got it all, Davies. Admission of intent. It's pretty clear-cut. Leo's gaze returned to Brittany. The last vestige of the husband she knew was gone, replaced entirely by the police officer she had summoned. Brittany Davies, he said, his voice formal and ringing with authority. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The command was so shocking, so utterly final, that it took a moment to register. Brittany just stared at him, her jaw slack with disbelief. What? Leo, no, you can't be serious. Stop this. This is a joke, right? Tell them to go. It's a family matter. It stopped being a family matter the second you dialed 911, Leo said, his voice unyielding. He reached for his hip, and the metallic click of the handcuffs being unlatched echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. You made this a police matter, and as an officer of the law, I have a duty to act. Now turn around. That is your last warning. Panic, pure and primal, finally broke through her delusion. No, you can't do this to me. I'm your wife, she shrieked, backing away until she hit the wall. Carol, tell him to stop. It was just a misunderstanding. I looked from her terrified face to my son's stony profile. A part of me, the mother in me, felt a nauseating lurch of pity. But then I remembered the smug, triumphant look on her face when she thought I was the one about to be arrested. I remembered the vile things she said, the poison she'd tried to inject into our family. My pity evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. This was a mess of her own making. She had laid the trap, and now she was caught in it. Officer Miller moved to block her escape, his presence a silent, immovable wall. Leo stepped forward, his movements practiced and efficient. Brittany, do not resist. Get your hands off me, she screamed, slapping at him as he took her arm. That was the final nail in her coffin. She's resisting, Miller stated calmly. In an instant, Leo had her arm twisted behind her back. Brittany let out a pained yelp as he expertly secured one wrist in the cold steel of the handcuffs. He was strong, efficient, and completely impersonal. He wasn't her husband anymore. He was an officer detaining a suspect. He reached for her other hand, and she started to sob hysterically, her body going limp against the wall. The second cuff clicked shut. My son had just arrested my daughter-in-law. He turned her around to face him, her makeup now a mess of tear-streaked mascara and foundation. As he began to recite her Miranda rights, his eyes met mine over her slumped shoulder. And in that moment, I saw the professional mask crack again, I saw not the police officer, but my son, his heart breaking as he was forced to choose between his oath and his wife. He finished reading her the rights. "Do you understand the rights I have just read to you?" he asked, his voice thick with an emotion he was fighting to control. Brittany just sobbed, unable to speak. Leo sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of the world. He started to lead her towards the door, her hands cuffed behind her back. It was surreal, a scene from a television drama playing out in my cozy living room. Just as they reached the threshold, Brittany seemed to pull herself together for one last desperate attempt. She twisted around, her eyes wild and pleading. "Leo, wait! There's something you don't know. I can explain everything. It's not what you think. It's about the baby." Leo froze. His hand was on the small of her back, ready to guide her out the door, but her words stopped him dead in his tracks. "The baby," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The stony-faced officer vanished, and in his place was just a man, my son, hanging on a single, impossible thread of hope. He looked from Brittany's tear-streaked face to me, his eyes wide with a desperate question. My own heart leaped into my throat. A baby. If she was pregnant, everything changed. The locket, the fight, the arrest. Maybe it was all just a catastrophic misunderstanding, fueled by hormones and fear. Brittany saw the flicker of hope in his eyes and clung to it like a drowning woman to a life raft. "Yes, the baby," she sobbed, turning her body as much as the cuffs would allow to face him. "Our baby, Leo. I found out last week. I didn't know how to tell you. I've been so emotional, so stressed. That's why I acted this way. I wanted the locket for him, for our son. I was thinking of our family, our future." The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Miller looked down at the floor, suddenly intensely interested in his own boots, giving them a moment of privacy. I watched my son's face, a canvas of warring emotions. The anger was still there, but it was being rapidly drowned by a tidal wave of confusion, hope, and a terrible dawning guilt. Had he just arrested his pregnant wife? The mother of his child. You're pregnant?" he asked, his voice strained. "Yes," she cried, nodding emphatically. "I was going to tell you tonight, make a special dinner. But your mother, she was being so stubborn, and I wasn't thinking straight. Please, Leo, don't do this. Think of our child." I took a step forward, my mind reeling. "Brittany, is this true?" I asked, my own anger softening. If a grandchild was on the way, a new life, then we had to find a way to fix this, for the baby's sake. Leo looked at me, then back at his wife. He was a man adrift, lost in an emotional storm. He slowly reached up and put a hand on her arm, his touch now gentle, questioning. "If you're pregnant, we'll sort this out. We can fix this, but you have to be telling me the truth, Brittany." "Is there a baby?" She looked him straight in the eye. "Yes, Leo. I swear on our love, on our future child's life." It was a beautiful, convincing lie, and for a second it almost worked. I saw Leo's resolve crumble. He was about to take the cuffs off. He was about to believe her. But then he hesitated. His eyes narrowed, and a small, almost imperceptible frown creased his forehead. He was a cop. He was trained to spot deception, to look for the cracks in a story. And something wasn't adding up. His gaze dropped from her face, down her body, and then moved to the designer handbag that was still sitting on my armchair, its contents slightly spilled from when she'd frantically pulled out her phone. His eyes locked onto something. I followed his gaze. Lying half hidden by a silk scarf was a small, flat, rectangular box. A box I recognized from the pharmacy. Slowly, deliberately, Leo released her arm. He walked over to the chair and picked up the box. He turned it over in his hand. The brand name was clearly visible, a popular brand of tampons. He held it up. The box was brand new, the cellophane wrapper still intact, but the side was clearly stamped with the words, Super Plus Absorbency, 32 count. He looked at Brittany, who had followed his movements with a growing sense of horror. He didn't have to say a word. The truth was right there in his hand, a silent, damning indictment of her final, most desperate lie. She wasn't pregnant. She couldn't be. she had just bought a new box of tampons. The hope that had flickered in Leo's eyes died, extinguished by the cold, hard reality. It was replaced by a look of such profound disappointment and disgust that it was painful to witness. He tossed the box back onto the chair. The last shred of love, the final benefit of the doubt he had been willing to give his wife, was gone forever. "The baby," he said, his voice completely hollow, devoid of all emotion. "You were going to lie about a child. Our child. You were willing to use an innocent life that doesn't even exist to manipulate me, to get out of this." He shook his head, a gesture of both pity and revulsion. "There is nothing left to fix." He turned away from her and nodded to Officer Miller. The brief, personal interlude was over. This time there would be no more interruptions, no more appeals. Officer Miller took her other arm, and together they escorted my daughter-in-law, the woman who had tried to destroy my life and break my son's heart, out of my home. I watched them go, watched as Leo put her into the back of the police cruiser, his movements stiff and professional. He didn't look back. The flashing lights pulled away from the curb, and the siren, silent this time, disappeared down the street, leaving my living room in an unnerving quiet. I sank down onto the sofa, my body trembling with the aftermath of the adrenaline. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked steadily, marking the minutes of my new, uncertain reality. My son's marriage was over. He would be heartbroken. But as I sat there, a strange sense of peace settled over me. He had done the right thing. He had upheld his oath. He had chosen justice over lies, integrity over a toxic love. He had been the good man I raised him to be. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the small frame photo of my late husband. Then I reached into the small drawer of the side table and took out the heart-shaped locket. I held it tight in my hand, its smooth, cool metal a comfort against my skin. The locket was safe. The tradition was safe. And one day, I knew I would place it around the neck of a woman worthy of it, the mother of my grandchild, a true part of our family.